Come on, get with it. Come on. Good morning, Lake Norman. 3 years ago, Dave Ferguson asked if he could join me for a cup of coffee over at Summit. And we sat down. I've known Dave for probably 15 years. And he said, I have this idea for a leadership conference. And I want you to be involved because the target market is your Chamber of Commerce members, your CEOs, your business owners, your managers, your young professionals, your retirees in the community. And we talked about it and what we wanted it to be, but we didn't quite get it. With all the things going on in the Chamber of Commerce, I hadn't calendared it yet. And about November of this past year, Titus Bartolotta walked into my office. And he said, I had this idea for something that's never been done at the lake before, a leadership conference. And I said, okay. I had somebody else talk about that too. And so we brought them together, and we went to Hickory Tavern. And imagine sitting at the table, and I've been a Chamber of Commerce exec here since 1996, but imagine being at the table with two John Maxwell trainers. Wow. I was in awe. And I listened to them talk and the vision that they had and what they would bring to this conference. And I said, well, I want to speak if I can. And they said, sure, we want you to. I said, well, you have to understand, every time I get before a group, whether it's HOAs or Kiwanis or Rotary, it's always I-77. I don't want to talk about tolls. They said, what do you want to talk about? I said, I want to talk about community service. And they said, well, it's a leadership conference. I said, yeah, but I don't think you can separate community service from leadership. I see those things as intertwined. Because you see, I don't think you can be a good business leader without being involved in your community. I mean, you look at the McIntosh Law Firm and Bob McIntosh, our presenting sponsor. Not just Bob. All of the attorneys in the firm are involved in so many capacities. Bob, chairman of Rural Hill and a past chair of the chamber. Jaycee is chair of Ada Jenkins. You got Erica involved in my chamber board. Amy, I think she chaired Rotary just a few years ago. Tim is on the Habitat board. Involved in the community. I'm a lucky guy. I've always had mentors in my life. And I think everybody needs that. I'm a big believer in business coaches. And I'm not saying that because of Dave and Titus. You have to have somebody that is going to pull you or push you or motivate you or inspire you. You have to have those people in your life. And I've had them every step of the way. Ray Parlier, who was one of my mentors, he was the athletic director at Furman University, once said in front of a group, if you ever see a turtle sitting on a fence post, you know he had help getting there. Now think about that. Every time I go down to our farm and my dad has me repair fences because the cows and the horses are always getting out and we're always repairing fences. Every time I look at a fence, I see that turtle sitting on the fence post. But you see, I'm that turtle. I am. Every step of the way throughout my career, I've had these people helping me, pushing me, pulling me. Every step of the way. I'm into team sports. I'm a terrible golfer. Golfers go out there, they're playing against themselves. I'm a team sport guy. I like to surround myself with people that we all can carry the ball. And I'm a football fan. I love college football. And the reason why is because you have to have the quarterback. You have to have the receiver. You have to have the guy that can kick field goals. South Carolina doesn't have a field goal kicker, but you have to have that. But you also have to have the offense and defensive line. Everybody plays a part, and that's so important. I've been involved in community service all my life, from the time I was that tall, because I had parents that believed in community service. My father's here. William, stand up. This is my dad. I call my father, Dad, Daddy, William, Wild Bill, whatever the occasion lends itself to. He knows who I'm talking to. I'm also a junior, so sometimes I refer to him as SR. But literally, my father, he was president of the Kiwanis. He was president of the Jaycees. He was chairman of the United Way, chairman of Red Cross, Little League Baseball, treasurer of the church, an elder. He coached the women's softball team, the kids' basketball teams. He was involved in just about everything you could be involved with in the city of Rock Hill. And my mother did the same, just like what Titus was talking about, the total package. Because Mom was actually involved in the PTA and March of Dimes and Jaycee Women. And from the time I was that tall, they were taking me out working on projects, Jaycee projects. And for you, those of you who don't know, Jaycees is a leadership training organization for young people 21 to 39. We get the leadership skills enhanced through running community projects. And just a few years ago, the Chamber of Commerce, we created a young professionals here in our community modeled on the Jaycees. And they're doing exactly that. Recently, our young professionals went out there. We had a goal for the U Torrance House and Store of trying to raise $5,000 for repairs. And they went out there and they had an auction. And they went around and they collected things to auction off. And there was a chairman. And they worked within a budget. And they delegated manpower. And then they held the auction. And they promoted the auction. And they raised $1,053, which, again, was a lot of money to our fundraiser. But they were gaining leadership experience through that community service project. But again, from that tall, I was going out and running these types of projects. And I remember I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and my mother, they were running some kind of Jaycee Women project for March of Dimes. And I was going door to door selling these little March of Dimes crutches for a nickel or a dime or a quarter, whatever I could get. And she would put me in the car and we'd go to neighborhood after neighborhood. And I'd walk up and I would sell these little crutches for whatever I could get, and they would drop money in my bag like trick or treat. And at the end of the neighborhood, I turned that bag in and we go to another neighborhood, collect more money. And at the end of the day, I got to keep the little leftover crutches for the March of Dimes. I used them with my army men. So I was really a happy little kid. But I was involved in projects like that. Daddy was in insurance, but his firm also sold real estate. So we had one of the largest yards in the neighborhood, particularly a backyard. And all the kids, they would come to my house to play football after school. And this was one particularly cold South Carolina afternoon. Our fingers were about to freeze. So we went inside, and there was this kid, 12-year-old Clark Caldwell was his name. He looked up at this wall, and my parents had the Love Me wall. If you've ever been to my office, you've seen my Love Me wall. All these plaques and pictures. Well, there's all these plaques that they had received from all these organizations they were involved in. Clark Caldwell looked up at that wall and he said, "Wow, your parents must be really important." I said, "They are." They didn't make a lot of money, but to the city of Rock Hill and that community, they were very important. And they taught me the importance of community service. I knew when I got out of college, I wanted to join the Jaycees, and I wanted to be president of my daddy's Jaycee chapter. That was my goal. If you'd have told me later I would go on and be president of South Carolina Jaycees and the United States Jaycees and Junior Chamber International, and I would have lunch with Ronald Reagan and introduce the Beach Boys and have a couple of beverages with Charlie Daniels, I'd have said, who? Who's going to do that? But I think if you work really, really hard, opportunities avail themselves to you. And I was also very, very lucky. But I knew I wanted to be president of my daddy's chapter. I knew I wanted to get involved in Jaycees because I'd been doing that as a kid. But now I was legal age. I was 21, I could join. And one of the first projects they were doing in June, at the June meeting, was in July, they go to a place called Camp Hope. It's a camp, summer camp for kids at Clemson, South Carolina, in their outdoor laboratory. And these kids were kids with special needs. And I didn't know how to be around kids with special needs. So I just didn't go. I didn't show up for that project. Nobody asked where I was at. We went by the whole next year. And then the chapter president in June stood up and said, okay, we've got Camp Hope Sunday coming up this next Sunday. Who all's going? Well, I was involved in everything in that chapter. And the chapter president looked at me and said, well, Bill, you're going, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm going. But Sunday rolled around. I put on my church clothes and went to church. I didn't show up. And I felt bad about that because when I tell people I'm going to do something, even then I did it. But I didn't. The next year, again, June rolled around. I was the vice president of that chapter. And they said, okay, all those that's going to go to Camp Hope Sunday, raise your hand. I didn't raise my hand, and Steve Marshall looked and said, well, you're going to go, aren't you? I said, yeah. But that Sunday rolled around, and I wasn't there. I just didn't know how to be with people with disabilities. I felt uncomfortable. I didn't know how to do it. The next year, I was the chapter president. I was the one standing up in front of the room asking, who's going to Camp Hope Sunday? And you can't ask people to do something that you're not willing to do. So, everybody piled in the cars, and off we went to Camp Hope Sunday. Now, some of you know I'm a big Gamecock, and you probably just say, you just wanted to go to Clemson. Well, there's that too, you know. I get near Clemson, South Carolina, I break out, you know. But we did. We went down to Camp Hope Sunday, and we stopped at the Kentucky Fried Chicken right outside of Clemson. And we went on into town, and we had the chicken and the mashed potatoes and the green beans. And when we got there, the executive director of the camp assigned us our camper. Little kid. 30 years later, I remember Joey. Joey had Downs. Joey was like the little Energizer bunny. He was just everywhere, and he never stopped talking. And we sat down, and we did grace, and we had our meal, and I was talking to somebody, and I looked over. Joey was sitting beside me, and he was picking green beans off of my plate. I'm not used to people eating off of my plate. But he just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He was laughing. He's looking up at me. This is great. I kind of dismissed it and continued to do things and was talking, and then I looked over, and Joey had his spoon, and he just went into my mashed potatoes and started eating off my plate again. I was taken back. And Joey just laughed. He just thought that he was the funniest guy in the world. Well, after the meal, they all go up and they do either a skit or something, and they were singing that day. It was probably 24 kids. And they got up there and they started singing their songs that they had learned. And my camper, Joey, was the loudest one in the bunch. And he was looking dead at me. Never lost eye contact. And when it was done, he came back and he said, Mr. Bill, did you hear me? I said, I think everybody heard you. And we started talking some more, and pretty soon it was time to wrap up the day. And we were saying our goodbyes, and this little kid I'd never met before, he came up to me, and he threw his arms around my waist, and he hugged me. He said, I love you. I love you. And I realized at that point, those kids, they didn't have a problem. They didn't have a special need. I did. And Joey helped me find mine. Fast forward to 2006, I was president of Lake Norman Kiwanis Club. I was in my office one day, and I got a phone call from a guy named Peter Rickey in Charlotte. And he said, Bill, you're the president of our Kiwanis Club there at the lake, right? And I said, yes. He said, well, we have a club for young people with disabilities, 18 years of age or older, called the Aktion Club. And we have a guy in Davidson. He and his mother are driving from Davidson all the way down to Matthews once a month to come to the Aktion Club. Would you consider hosting an Aktion Club there at the lake? Truth of the matter is, I didn't consult the chapter. We didn't bring it up for a vote. I said, yes, we will. Absolutely. Since 2006, we've had a club that meets at the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce on the fourth Friday of every month at 7 o'clock. And sometimes you think you've had the day from heck. You might be sitting out here in traffic. Things aren't going your way. You might be in a grumpy mood. But then you go to this club meeting of the Action Club. And if there were ever young people that should have a reason to be unhappy with things, it probably should be this group. But they're not. They're so happy to be together. They're running projects. We go to hockey games. We do putt-putt. We do bowling. They did a collection of sports equipment that they gave to Special Olympics. A school drive of school supplies that helped the elementary school for our education collaborative. They're giving back to the community, and they're having fun. Every fourth Friday. About 6-7 years ago, we had a picnic, and one of the parents came up to me. She said, which one of these kids are yours? I said, well, I don't have children. She said, oh. So you have a family member or a friend with a special need? I said, no. She said, well, why do you do this then? I said, because it's what we do. I'm in Kiwanis. We run projects for children. We work to make it a better community to live. And she looked at me for a second and said, oh, so they're all your kids? I said, yes, they're all my kids. You know, I asked my father again one time why he did all the things that he did. And he said there's a Bible verse in Matthew. Let your light so shine to show your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And I got it. I understood. We all have a responsibility to make this community the best it can possibly be. God has bestowed on each of us certain talents and gifts, certain skills that we have, and that is our gift from God. And how we use those talents is our gift back to God. Here's the truth. 5 minutes from where you're sitting, tonight, there's going to be a family that doesn't have enough food to put on the table. And the kids will go hungry when they go to bed. And we live in an affluent community, Lake Norman. And often when we have Big Day at the Lake, we think all these kids come from Charlotte, these low-income families, these single-parent families that come up from Charlotte. But no. A lot of them live right here in Cornelius or Huntersville or Davidson or Mooresville. There's so much we can still do. 5 minutes from where Chris Haley is sitting, there is going to be a teenager that tries a marijuana cigarette today for the first time. Or they look at a pill and think that's the answer. It's not the answer. Last year, we lost a chamber member that was dealing with addiction. Somewhere in our Lake Norman community this evening, there'll be a woman who doesn't have a home, living out of her car, doesn't know where to turn. Situational homelessness. But there is an organization, and because of you being here today and the contributions that you've made, we have the Hope House that will take care of her and other females. We have groups like the Rotary and the Kiwanis and the Jaycees and the Young Professionals and Ada Jenkins and Angels and Sparrows that realize we can do better. We can be better. And they reach out and run projects to make this a better community. Just walking into this hall today, you walk by all of these boxes that, Pastor, I noticed we were taking up food for those who don't have it. There is still so much we can do. Bobby Kennedy said, some people see things as they are and say, why? I see things as they could be and say, why not? And as long as we have organizations like our church volunteers and Ada Jenkins and all these other civic organizations, we can see the world as it could be and say, why not? One of our founding fathers, Thomas Paine, said, we have it in our power to change the world. 250 years ago. We have it in our power to change the world. I tell you, we have it, us in this room, the power to change the face of this region. One community, one person, and one heart at a time. Thank you and God bless.